Chapter 22. Fool Things I Have Done. I have a folder in my private filing cabinet marked FTD, short for Fool Things I've Done. I put in that folder written records of the fool things I've been guilty of. I sometimes dictate these memos to my secretary, but sometimes they're so personal, so stupid, that I'm ashamed to dictate them, so I write them out in longhand. I can still recall some of the criticism of Dale Carnegie that I put in my FTD folder 15 years ago. If I'd been utterly honest with myself, I would now have a filing cabinet bursting out at the seams with these FTD memos. I can truthfully repeat what King Saul said 30 centuries ago. I have played the fool and have erred exceedingly. When I get out my FTD folders and reread the criticisms I have written of myself, they help me deal with the toughest problem I shall ever face, the management of Dale Carnegie. I used to blame my troubles on other people, but as I've grown older and wiser, I hope, I realize that I myself, in the last analysis, am to blame for almost all my misfortunes. Lots of people have discovered that as they grow older. "No one but myself," said Napoleon at St. Helena. "No one but myself can be blamed for my fall. I have been my own greatest enemy, the cause of my own disastrous fate." Let me tell you about a man I knew who was an artist when it came to self-appraisal and self-management. His name was H.P. Howell. When the news of his sudden death in the drugstore of the Hotel Ambassador in New York was flashed across the nation on July 31st, 1944, Wall Street was shocked, for he was the leader in American finance, chairman of the board of the Commercial National Bank and Trust Company, and a director of several large corporations. He grew up with little formal education, started out in life clerking in a country store, and later became credit manager for U.S. Steel, and was on his way to position and power. "For years I have kept an engagement book showing all the appointments I have during the day," Mr. Howell told me when I asked him to explain the reasons for his success. "My family never makes any plans for me on Saturday night, for the family knows that I devote a part of each Saturday evening to self-examination and a review and appraisal of my work during the week. After dinner I go off by myself, open my engagement book, and think over all the interviews, discussions, and meetings that have taken place since Monday morning. I ask myself, what mistakes did I make that time? What did I do that was right? And in what way could I have improved my performance? What lesson can I learn from that experience? I sometimes find that this weekly review makes me very unhappy. Sometimes I'm astonished by my own blunders. Of course, as the years have gone by, these blunders have become less frequent. This system of self-analysis, continued year after year, has done more for me than any other thing I have ever attempted." Maybe H.P. Howell borrowed his idea from Ben Franklin. Only Franklin didn't wait until Saturday night. He gave himself a severe going-over every night. He discovered that he had 13 serious faults. Here are 3 of them: wasting time, stewing around over trifles, arguing and contradicting people. Wise old Ben Franklin realized that unless he eliminated these handicaps, he wasn't going to get very far. So he battled one of his shortcomings every day for a week and kept a record of who had won each day's slugging match. The next week he would pick out another bad habit, put on the gloves, and when the bell rang he would come out of his corner fighting. Franklin kept up this battle with his faults every week for more than 2 years. No wonder he became one of the best-loved and most influential men this nation ever produced. Elbert Hubbard said, "Every man is a damn fool for at least 5 minutes a day. Wisdom consists in not exceeding that limit." The small man flies into a rage over the slightest criticism, but the wise man is eager to learn from those who have censured him and reproved him and disputed the passage with him. Walt Whitman put it this way: "Have you learned only of those who admired you and were tender with you and stood aside for you? Have you not learned great lessons from those who rejected you and braced themselves against you or disputed the passage with you?" Instead of waiting for our enemies to criticize us or our work, let's beat them to it. Let's be our own most severe critic. Let's find and remedy all our weaknesses before our enemies get a chance to say a word. That is what Charles Darwin did. In fact, he spent 15 years criticizing, well, the story goes like this. When Darwin completed the manuscript of his immortal book, The Origin of Species, he realized that the publication of his revolutionary concept of creation would rock the intellectual and religious worlds. So he became his own critic and spent another 15 years checking his data, challenging his reasoning, criticizing his conclusions. Suppose someone denounced you as a mad fool. What would you do? Get angry? Indignant? Here's what Lincoln did. Edward M. Stanton, Lincoln's Secretary of War, once called Lincoln a damned fool. Stanton was indignant because Lincoln had been meddling in Stanton's affairs. In order to please a selfish politician, Lincoln had signed an order transferring certain regiments. Stanton not only refused to carry out Lincoln's orders, but swore that Lincoln was a damn fool for ever signing such orders. What happened? When Lincoln was told what Stanton had said, Lincoln calmly replied, "If Stanton said I am a damned fool, then I must be, for he is nearly always right. I'll just step over and see for myself." Lincoln did go to see Stanton. Stanton convinced him that the order was wrong, and Lincoln withdrew it. Lincoln welcomed criticism when he knew it was sincere, founded on knowledge, and given in a spirit of helpfulness. You and I ought to welcome that kind of criticism, too, for we can't even hope to be right more than 3 times out of 4. At least, that was all Theodore Roosevelt said he could hope for when he was in the White House. Einstein, the most profound thinker of our day, confessed that his conclusions were wrong 99% of the time. The opinions of our enemies, said La Rochefoucauld, come nearer to the truth about us than do our own opinions. I know that statement may be true many times, yet when anyone starts to criticize me, if I do not watch myself, I instantly and automatically leap to the defensive, even before I have the slightest idea of what my critic is going to say. I'm disgusted with myself every time I do it. We all tend to resent criticism and lap up praise, regardless of whether either the criticisms or the praise is justified. We are not creatures of logic. We're creatures of emotions. Our logic is like a birch bark canoe tossed about on a deep, dark, stormy sea of emotion. If we hear that someone has spoken ill of us, let's not try to defend ourselves. Every fool does that. Let's be original and humble and brilliant. Let's confound our critic and win applause for ourselves by saying, "If my critic had known about all my other faults, he would have criticized me much more severely than he did." In previous chapters, I've talked about what to do when you're unjustly criticized. But here's another idea. When your anger is rising because you feel you've been unjustly condemned, why not stop and say, "Just a minute, I am far from perfect. If Einstein admits he is wrong 99% of the time, maybe I'm wrong at least 80% of the time. Maybe I deserve this criticism. If I do, I ought to be thankful for it and try to profit by it." Charles Luckman, a former president of the Pepsodent Company, spent $1 million a year putting Bob Hope on the air. He didn't look at the letters praising the program, but he insisted on seeing the critical letters. He knew he might learn something from them. The Ford Company was so eager to find out what was wrong with its management and operations that it polled the employees and invited them to criticize the company. I know a former soap salesman who used to even ask for criticism. When he first started out selling soap for Colgate, orders came slowly. He worried about losing his job. Since he knew there was nothing wrong with the soap or the price, he figured that the trouble must be himself. When he failed to make a sale, he would often walk around the block trying to figure out what was wrong. Had he been too vague? Did he lack enthusiasm? Sometimes he would go back to the merchant and say, "I haven't come back here to try to sell you any soap. I've come back to get your advice and your criticism. Won't you please tell me what I did that was wrong when I tried to sell you soap a few minutes ago? You're far more experienced and successful than I am. Please give me your criticism. Be frank. Don't pull your punches." This attitude won him a lot of friends and priceless advice. And what do you suppose ever happened to him? he rose to be president of the Colgate-Palmolive Peet Soap Company, one of the world's largest makers of soap. His name is E.H. Little. It takes a big man to do what H.P. Howell, Ben Franklin, and E.H. Little did. And now, while nobody is looking, why not peep into the mirror and ask yourself whether you belong in that kind of company? To keep from worrying about criticism, here is Rule 3. Let's keep a record of the fool things we've done and criticize ourselves. Since we can't hope to be perfect, let's do what E.H. Little did. Let's ask for unbiased, helpful, constructive criticism. Part 6 in a nutshell. How to keep from worrying about criticism. Rule 1. Unjust criticism is often a disguised compliment. It often means that you have aroused jealousy and envy. Remember that no one ever kicks a dead dog. Rule 2. Do the very best you can, and then put up your old umbrella and keep the rain of criticism from running down the back of your neck. Rule 3. Let's keep a record of the fool things we've done and criticize ourselves. Since we can't hope to be perfect, let's do what E.H. Little did. Let's ask for unbiased, helpful, constructive criticism. Part 7. 6 ways to prevent fatigue and worry, and keep your energy and spirits high. Chapter 23. How to add 1 hour a day to your waking life. Why am I writing a chapter on preventing fatigue in a book on preventing worry? That's simple, because fatigue often produces worry, or at least it makes you susceptible to worry. Any medical student will tell you that fatigue lowers your resistance to the emotions of fear and worry, so preventing fatigue tends to prevent worry. And did I say tends to prevent worry? This is putting it mildly. Dr. Edmund Jacobson goes much further. Dr. Jacobson has written 2 books on relaxation, Progressive Relaxation and You Must Relax. And as director of the University of Chicago Laboratory for Clinical Physiology, he spent years conducting investigations in using relaxation as a method in medical practice. He declares that any nervous or emotional state fails to exist in the presence of complete relaxation. That's another way of saying you cannot continue to worry if you relax. The first rule is rest often. Rest before you get tired. And why is that so important? Because fatigue accumulates with astonishing rapidity. The United States Army has discovered, by repeated tests, that even young men toughened by years of Army training, can march better, can hold up longer, if they throw down their packs and rest 10 minutes out of every hour. So the Army forces them to do just that. Your heart is just as smart as the U.S. Army. Your heart pumps enough blood through your body every day to fill a railway tank car. It exerts enough energy every 24 hours to shovel 20 tons of coal onto a platform 3 feet high. It does this incredible amount of work for 50, 70, maybe 90 years. How can it stand it? Dr. Walter B. Cannon of the Harvard Medical School explained it. He said, most people have the idea that the heart is working all the time. As a matter of fact, there's a definite rest period after each contraction. When beating at a moderate rate of 70 pulses per minute, the heart is actually working only 9 hours out of the 24. In the aggregate, its rest periods total a full 15 hours per day. During World War II, Winston Churchill, in his late 60s and early 70s, was able to work 16 hours a day, year after year, directing the war efforts of the British Empire, a phenomenal record. His secret? He worked in bed each morning until 11 o'clock, reading reports, dictating orders, making telephone calls, and holding important conferences. After lunch, he went to bed again and slept for an hour. In the evening, he went to bed once more and slept for 2 hours before having dinner at 8. He didn't cure fatigue. He didn't have to cure it. He prevented it. Because he rested frequently, he was able to work on, fresh and fit, until long past midnight. The original John D. Rockefeller made 2 extraordinary records. He accumulated the greatest fortune the world had ever seen up to that time, and he also lived to be 98. How did he do it? The chief reason, of course, was because he had inherited a tendency to live long. Another reason was his habit of taking a half-hour nap in his office every noon. He would lie down on his office couch, and not even the President of the United States could get John D. on the phone while he was having his snooze. In his excellent book, Why Be Tired, Daniel W. Joslin observed, "Rest is not a matter of doing absolutely nothing. Rest is repair." There is so much repair power in a short period of rest that even a 5-minute nap will help to forestall fatigue. Connie Mack, the grand old man of baseball, told me that if he didn't take an afternoon nap before a game, he was all tuckered out at around the 5th inning. But if he did go to sleep, if for only 5 minutes, he could last throughout an entire doubleheader without feeling tired. When I asked Eleanor Roosevelt how she was able to carry such an exhausting schedule during the 12 years she was in the White House, she said that before meeting a crowd or making a speech, she would often sit in a chair or davenport, close her eyes, and relax for 20 minutes. I once interviewed Gene Autry in his dressing room at Madison Square Garden, where he was the star attraction at the World's Championship Rodeo. I noticed an Army cot in his dressing room. "I lie down there every afternoon," Gene Autry said, "and get an hour's nap between performances. When I'm making pictures in Hollywood," he continued, "I often relax in a big easy chair and get 2 or 3 10-minute naps a day. They buck me up tremendously." Edison attributed his enormous energy and endurance to his habit of sleeping whenever he wanted to. I interviewed Henry Ford shortly before his 80th birthday. I was surprised to see how fresh and fine he looked. I asked him the secret. He said, "I never stand up when I can sit down, and I never sit down when I can lie down." Horace Mann, the father of modern education, did the same thing as he grew older. When he was president of Antioch College, he used to stretch out on a couch while interviewing students. I persuaded a motion picture director in Hollywood to try a similar technique. He confessed that it worked miracles. I refer to Jack Chertok, who was one of Hollywood's top directors. When he came to see me several years ago, he was then head of the short feature department of MGM. Worn out and exhausted, he had tried everything, tonics, vitamins, medicine. Nothing helped much. I suggested that he take a vacation a day. How? By stretching out in his office and relaxing while holding conferences with his staff writers. When I saw him again 2 years later, he said, "A miracle has happened. That's what my own physicians call it. I used to sit up in my chair, tense and taut, while discussing ideas for our short features. Now I stretch out on the office couch during these conferences. I feel better than I have felt in 20 years. Work 2 hours a day longer, yet I rarely get tired." How does all this apply to you? If you're a stenographer, you can't take naps in the office, as Edison did, and as Sam Goldwyn did. And if you're an accountant, you can't stretch out on the couch while discussing a financial statement with the boss. But if you live in a small city and go home for lunch, you may be able to take a 10-minute nap after lunch. That is what General George C. Marshall used to do. He felt he was so busy directing the U.S. Army in wartime that he had to rest at noon. If you're over 50 and feel you're too rushed to do it, then buy immediately all the life insurance you can get. Funerals come high, and suddenly these days, and your spouse may want to take your insurance money and marry a younger person. If you can't take a nap at noon, you can at least try to lie down for an hour before the evening meal. It is cheaper than a cocktail, and over a long stretch it is 5,467 times more effective. If you can sleep for an hour around 5, 6, or 7 o'clock, you can add 1 hour a day to your waking life. Why? How? Because an hour's nap before the evening meal, plus 6 hours sleep at night, a total of 7 hours, will do you more good than 8 hours of unbroken sleep. A physical worker can do more work if he takes more time out for rest. Frederick Taylor demonstrated that while working as a scientific management engineer with the Bethlehem Steel Company. He observed that laboring men were loading approximately 12.5 tons of pig iron per man each day on freight cars, and they were exhausted at noon. He made a scientific study of all the fatigue factors involved and declared that these men should be loading not 12.5 tons of pig iron per day, but 47 tons per day. He figured that they ought to do almost 4 times as much as they were doing and not be exhausted. But prove it. Taylor selected a Mr. Schmidt, who was required to work by the stopwatch. Schmidt was told by the man who stood over him with a watch, "Now pick up a pig and walk. Now sit down and rest. Now walk. Now rest." And what happened? Schmidt carried 47 tons of pig iron each day, while the other men carried only 12.5 tons per man. And he practically never failed to work at this pace during the 3 years that Frederick Taylor was at Bethlehem. Schmidt was able to do this because he rested before he got tired. He worked approximately 26 minutes before he got tired. He worked approximately 26 minutes out of the hour and rested 34 minutes. He rested more than he worked, yet he did almost 4 times as much work as the others. Is this mere hearsay? No, you can read the record yourself on pages 41 through 62 of Principles of Scientific Management by Frederick Winslow Taylor. And let me repeat. Do what the Army does. Take frequent rests. Do what your heart does. Rest before you get tired, and you will add 1 hour a day to your waking life. Chapter 24. What makes you tired, and what you can do about it. Here's an astounding and significant fact. Mental work alone can't make you tired. It sounds absurd, but a few years ago, scientists tried to find out how long the human brain could labor without reaching a diminished capacity for work, the scientific definition of fatigue. To the amazement of these scientists, they discovered that blood passing through the brain when it's active shows no fatigue at all. If you took blood from the veins of a day laborer while he was working, you would find it full of fatigue toxins and fatigue products. But if you took a drop of blood from the brain of an Albert Einstein, it would show no fatigue toxins whatever at the end of the day. So far as the brain is concerned, it can work as well and as swiftly at the end of 8 or even 12 hours of effort as at the beginning. The brain is utterly tireless. So what makes you tired? Psychiatrists declare that most of our fatigue derives from our mental and emotional attitudes. One of England's most distinguished psychiatrists, A.J. Hadfield, says in his book, The Psychology of Power, "The greater part of the fatigue from which we suffer is of mental origin. In fact, exhaustion of purely physical origin is rare." One of America's most distinguished psychiatrists, Dr. A. Brill, goes even further. He declares 100% of the fatigue of the sedentary worker in good health is due to psychological factors, by which we mean emotional factors. What kinds of emotional factors tire the sedentary or sitting worker? Joy? Commitment? No, never. Boredom, resentment, the feeling of not being appreciated, a feeling of futility, hurry, anxiety, worry. Those are the emotional factors that exhaust the sitting worker, make him susceptible to colds, reduce his output, and send him home with a nervous headache. Yes, we get tired because our emotions produce nervous tensions in the body. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Company pointed that out in a leaflet on fatigue. Hard work by itself, says this great life insurance company, seldom causes fatigue which cannot be cured by a good sleep or rest. Worry, tenseness, and emotional upsets are 3 of the biggest causes of fatigue. Often they're to blame when physical or mental work seems to be the cause. Remember that a tense muscle is a working muscle. Ease up. Save energy for important duties. Stop now, right where you are, and give yourself a checkup. As you read these lines, are you scowling at the book? Are you sitting relaxed in your chair, or are you hunching up your shoulders? Are the muscles of your face tense? Unless your entire body is as limp and relaxed as an old rag doll, you are at this very moment producing nervous tensions and muscular tensions. You are producing nervous tensions and nervous fatigue. Why do we produce these unnecessary tensions in doing mental work? Daniel W. Jocelyn says, "I find that the chief obstacle is the almost universal belief that hard work requires a feeling of effort, else it is not well done. So we scowl when we concentrate. We hunch up our shoulders. We call on our muscles to make the motion of effort, which in no way assists our brain in its work." Here's an astonishing and tragic truth. Millions of people who wouldn't dream of wasting dollars go right on wasting and squandering their energy with the recklessness of 7 drunken sailors in Singapore. What is the answer to this nervous fatigue? Relax, relax, relax. Learn to relax while you're doing your work. Easy? No, you'll probably have to reverse the habits of a lifetime. But it is worth the effort, for it may revolutionize your life. William James said in his essay, The Gospel of Relaxation, "The American over-tension and jerkiness and breathlessness and intensity and agony of expression are bad habits, nothing more or less. Tension is a habit. Relaxing is a habit, and bad habits can be broken, good habits formed." How do you relax? Do you start with your mind or do you start with your nerves? You don't start with either. You always begin to relax with your muscles. Well, let's give it a try. To show how it's done, suppose we start with your eyes. Read this paragraph through, and when you've reached the end, lean back, close your eyes, and say to your eyes silently, "Let go, let go. Stop straining, stop frowning. Let go, let go." Repeat this over and over, very slowly, for a minute. Didn't you notice that after a few seconds the muscles of the eyes began to obey? Didn't you feel as though some hand had wiped away the tension? Well, incredible as it seems, you have sampled in that 1 minute the whole key and secret to the art of relaxing. You can do the same thing with the jaw, with the muscles of the face, with the neck, with the shoulders, the whole of the body. But the most important organ of all is the eye. Dr. Edmund Jacobson of the University of Chicago has gone so far as to say that if you can completely relax the muscles of your eyes, you can forget all your troubles. The reason the eyes are so important in relieving nervous tension is that they burn up 1/4 of all the nervous energies consumed by the body. That is also why so many people with perfectly sound vision suffer from eye strain. They are tensing the eyes. Vicki Baum, the famous novelist, said that when she was a child, she met an old man who taught her one of the most important lessons she ever learned. She had fallen down and cut her knees and hurt her wrist. The old man picked her up. He had once been a circus clown, and as he brushed her off, he said, "The reason you injured yourself was because you don't know how to relax. You have to pretend you are as limp as a sock, an old crumpled sock. Come, I'll show you how to do it." That old man taught Vicki Baum and the other children how to fall, how to do flip-flops, and how to turn somersaults. And he always insisted, "Think of yourself as an old crumpled sock, then you've got to relax." You can relax in odd moments almost anywhere you are. Only don't make an effort to relax. Relaxation is the absence of all tension and effort. Think ease and relaxation. Begin by thinking relaxation of the muscles of your eyes and your face, saying over and over, "Let go, let go, let go," and relax. Feel the energy flowing out of your facial muscles to the center of your body. Think of yourself as free from tension as a baby. That is what Galli-Curci, the great soprano, used to do. Helen Jepson told me that she used to see Galli-Curci before a performance, sitting in a chair with all her muscles relaxed and her lower jaw so limp it actually sagged. An excellent practice. It kept her from becoming too nervous before her stage entrance. It prevented fatigue. Here are 4 suggestions that will help you learn to relax. 1. Relax in odd moments. Let your body go limp like an old sock. I keep an old maroon-colored sock on my desk as I work. Keep it there as a reminder of how limp I ought to be. If you haven't got a sock, a cat will do. Did you ever pick up a kitten sleeping in the sunshine? If so, both ends sagged like a wet newspaper. Even the yogis in India say that if you want to master the art of relaxation, study the cat. I never saw a tired cat, a cat with a nervous breakdown, or a cat suffering from insomnia, worry, or stomach ulcers. You will probably avoid these disasters if you learn to relax as the cat does. 2. Work as much as possible in a comfortable position. Remember that tensions in the body produce aching shoulders and nervous fatigue. 3. Check yourself 4 or 5 times a day and say to yourself, am I making my work harder than it actually is? Am I using muscles that have nothing to do with the work I'm doing? This will help you form the habit of relaxing, and as Dr. David Harold Fink says, among those who know psychology best, it is habits 2 to 1. 4. Test yourself again at the end of the day by asking yourself, just how tired am I? If I am tired, it's not because of the mental work I have done, but because of the way I have done it. I measure my accomplishments, says Daniel W. Jocelyn, not by how tired I am at the end of the day, but how tired I am not. He says, when I feel particularly tired at the end of the day, or when irritability proves that my nerves are tired, I know beyond question that it has been an inefficient day, both as to quantity and quality. If every businessman in America would learn that same lesson, our death rate from hypertension diseases would drop overnight, and we would stop filling up our sanitariums and asylums with people who have been broken by fatigue and worry. Chapter 25. How to Avoid Fatigue and Keep Looking Young. One day last autumn, my associate flew up to Boston to attend a session of one of the most unusual medical classes in the world. Medical? Well, yes, it meets once a week at the Boston Dispensary, and the patients who attend it get regular and thorough medical examinations before they're admitted. But actually, this class is a psychological clinic. Although it's officially called a class in applied psychology, formerly the thought control class, a name suggested by the first member, its real purpose is to deal with people who are ill from worry, and many of these patients are emotionally disturbed housewives. How did such a class for worriers get started? Well, in 1930, Dr. Joseph H. Pratt, who, by the way, had been a pupil of Sir William Osler, observed that many of the outpatients who came to the Boston Dispensary apparently had nothing wrong with them physically, yet they had practically all the symptoms that flesh is heir to. One woman's hands were so crippled with arthritis that she'd lost all use of them. Another was in agony with all the excruciating symptoms of cancer of the stomach. Others had backaches, headaches, were chronically tired, or had vague aches and pains. They actually felt these pains, but the most exhaustive medical examination showed that nothing whatever was wrong with these people, in the physical sense. Many old-fashioned doctors would have said it was all imagination, all in the mind. But Dr. Pratt realized that it was no use to tell these patients to go home and forget it. He knew that most of these people didn't want to be sick. If it was so easy to forget their ailments, they would do so themselves. So, what could be done? He opened this class to a chorus of doubts from the medical doubters on the sidelines, and the class worked wonders. In the years that have passed since it started, thousands of patients have been cured by attending it. Some of the patients have been coming for years, as religious in their attendance as though going to church. My assistant talked to a woman who has hardly missed a session in more than 9 years. She said that when she first went to the clinic, she was thoroughly convinced she had a floating kidney and some kind of heart ailment. She was so worried and tense that she occasionally lost her eyesight and had spells of blindness. Yet today she's confident and cheerful and in excellent health. She looked only about 40, yet she held one of her grandchildren asleep in her lap. I used to worry so much about my family troubles, she said, that I wished I could die. But I learned at this clinic the futility of worrying. I learned to stop it, and I can honestly say now that my life is serene. Dr. Rose Hilferding, the medical advisor of the class, said that she thought one of the best remedies for lightening worry is talking your troubles over with someone you trust. We call it catharsis, she said. When our patients come here, they can talk their troubles over at length until they get them off their minds. Brooding over worries alone and keeping them to oneself causes great nervous tension. We all have to share our troubles. We have to share worry. We have to feel there is someone in the world who is willing to listen and able to understand. My assistant witnessed the great relief that came to one woman from talking out her worries. She had domestic worries, and when she first began to talk, she was like a wound-up spring. Then, gradually, as she kept on talking, she began to calm down. At the end of the interview, she was actually smiling. Had the problem been solved? No, it wasn't that easy. What caused the change was talking to someone, getting a little advice and a little human sympathy. What had really worked the change was the tremendous healing value that lies in words. Psychoanalysis is based to some extent on this healing power of words. Ever since the days of Freud, analysts have known that a patient could find relief from his inner anxieties if he could talk, just talk. Why is this so? Maybe because by talking we gain a little better insight into our troubles, get a better perspective. No one knows the whole answer, but all of us know that spitting it out or getting it off our chests brings almost instant relief. So the next time we have an emotional problem, why don't we look around for someone to talk to? I don't mean, of course, to go around making pests of ourselves by whining and complaining to everyone in sight. Let's decide on someone we can trust and make an appointment. Maybe a relative, a doctor, a lawyer, a minister or priest. Then say to that person, "I want your advice. I have a problem and I wish you would listen while I put it in words. You may be able to advise me. You may see angles to this thing that I can't see myself. But even if you can't, you'll help me tremendously if you will just sit and listen while I talk it out." Talking things out, then, is one of the principal therapies used at the Boston dispensary class. But here are some other ideas we picked up at the class, things you can do in your home. 1. Keep a notebook or scrapbook for inspirational reading. Into this book you can paste all the poems or short prayers or quotations which appeal to you personally and give you a lift. Then, when a rainy afternoon sends your spirits plunging down, perhaps you can find a recipe in this book for dispelling the gloom. Many patients kept such notebooks for years. They said it was a spiritual shot in the arm. 2. Don't dwell too long on the shortcomings of others. One woman at the class who found herself developing into a scolding, nagging, and haggard-faced wife was brought up short with the question, "What would you do if your husband died?" She was so shocked by the idea that she immediately sat down and drew up a list of all her husband's good points. She made quite a list. Why don't you try the same thing the next time you feel you married a tyrant? Maybe you will find after reading your spouse's virtues that he or she is a person you'd like to meet. 3. Get interested in people. Develop a friendly, healthy interest in the people who share your life. One ailing woman who felt herself so exclusive that she hadn't any friends was told to try to make up a story about the next person she met. She began in the bus to weave backgrounds and settings for the people she saw. She tried to imagine what their lives had been like. First thing you know, she was talking to people everywhere, and today she's happy, alert, and a charming human being, cured of her pains. 4. Make up a schedule for tomorrow's work before you go to bed tonight. The class found out that many people feel driven and harassed by the unending round of work and things they must do. They never got their work finished. They were chased by the clock. To cure this sense of hurry and worry, the suggestion was made that they draw up a schedule each night for the following day. What happened? More work was accomplished, much less fatigue, a feeling of pride and achievement, and time left over for rest and enjoyment. 5. Finally, avoid tension and fatigue. Relax, relax. Nothing will make you look old sooner than tension and fatigue. Nothing will work such havoc with your freshness and looks. My assistant sat for an hour in the Boston Thought Control class while Professor Paul E. Johnson, the director, went over many of the principles we've already discussed in the previous chapter, the rules for relaxing. At the end of 10 minutes of these relaxing exercises, which my assistant did with the others, she was almost asleep sitting upright in her chair. Why is such stress laid on this physical relaxing? because the clinic knows, as other doctors know, that if you're going to get the worry kinks out of people, they've got to relax. Yes, you have got to relax. Strangely enough, a good hard floor is better to relax on than an inner spring bed. It gives more resistance. It's good for the spine. All right then, here are some exercises you can do. Try them for a week and see what you do for your looks and disposition. A. Lie flat on the floor whenever you feel tired. Stretch as tall as you can. Roll around if you want to. Do it twice a day. B. Close your eyes. You might try saying, as Professor Johnson recommended, something like this. The sun is shining overhead, the sky is blue and sparkling, nature is calm and in control of the world, and I, as nature's child, am in tune with the universe. Or, better still, pray. C. If you cannot lie down because you can't spare the time, then you can achieve almost the same effect sitting down in a chair. A hard, upright chair is the best for relaxing. Sit upright in the chair like a seated Egyptian statue, and let your hands rest, palms down, on the tops of your thighs. D. Now, slowly tense the toes, then let them relax. Tense the muscles in your legs, and let them relax. Do this slowly upward with all the muscles of your body until you get to the neck. Then let your head roll around heavily, as though it were a football. Keep saying to your muscles, as in the previous chapter, let go, let go. E. Quiet your nerves with slow, steady breathing. Breathe from deep down. The yogis of India were right. Rhythmical breathing is one of the best methods ever discovered for soothing the nerves. F. Think of all the wrinkles and frowns in your face, and smooth them all out. Loosen up the worry creases you feel between your brows and at the sides of your mouth. Do this twice a day, and maybe you won't have to go to a health club to get a massage. Maybe the lines will disappear from the inside out. Chapter 26. 4 good working habits that will help prevent fatigue and worry. Good working habit number 1. Clear your desk of all papers except those relating to the immediate problem at hand. Roland L. Williams, president of Chicago and Northwestern Railway, once said, "A person with his desk piled high with papers on various matters will find his work much easier and more accurate if he clears that desk of all but the immediate problem on hand. I call this good housekeeping, and it's the #1 step toward efficiency." If you visit the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., you will find 5 words painted on the ceiling, 5 words written by the poet Pope. Order is heaven's first law. Order ought to be the first law of business, too. But is it? No. The average desk is cluttered up with papers that haven't been looked at for weeks. In fact, the publisher of a New Orleans newspaper once told me that his secretary cleared up one of his desks and found a typewriter that had been missing for 2 years. The mere sight of a desk littered with unanswered mail and reports and memos is enough to breed confusion, tensions, and worries. It is much worse than that. The constant reminder of a million things to do and no time to do them can worry you not only into tension and fatigue, but it can also worry you into high blood pressure, heart trouble, and stomach ulcers. Dr. John H. Stokes, professor, Graduate School of Medicine, University of Pennsylvania, read a paper before the National Convention of the American Medical Association, a paper entitled Functional Neuroses as Complications of Organic Disease. In that paper, Dr. Stokes listed 11 conditions under the title What to Look For in the Patient's State of Mind. Here's the first item on that list. The sense of must or obligation, the unending stretch of things ahead that simply have to be done. But how can such an elementary procedure as clearing your desk and making decisions help you avoid this high pressure, this sense of must, this sense of an unending stretch of things ahead that simply have to be done? Dr. William L. Sadler, the famous psychiatrist, told of a patient who, by using this simple device, avoided a nervous breakdown. The man was an executive in a big Chicago firm. When he came to Dr. Sadler's office, he was tense, nervous, worried. He knew he was heading for a tailspin, but he couldn't quit work. He had to have help. While this man was telling me his story, Dr. Sadler says, my telephone rang. It was the hospital calling, and instead of deferring the matter, I took time right then to come to a decision. I always settle questions, if possible, right on the spot. I'd no sooner hung up than the phone rang again. Again, an urgent matter which I took time to discuss. The third interruption came when a colleague of mine came into my office for advice on a patient who was critically ill. When I'd finished with him, I turned to my caller and began to apologize for keeping him waiting. But he'd brightened up. He had a completely different look on his face. "Don't apologize, Doctor," this man said to Sadler. "In the last 10 minutes, I think I've got a hunch as to what's wrong with me. I'm going back to my office and revise my working habits. But before I go, do you mind if I take a look in your desk?" Dr. Sadler opened up the drawers of his desk, all empty except for supplies. "Tell me," said the patient, "where do you keep your unfinished business?" "Finished," said Sadler. "And where do you keep your unanswered mail?" "Answered," Sadler told him. "My rule is never to lay down a letter until I've answered it. I dictate the reply to my secretary at once." 6 weeks later, this same executive invited Dr. Sadler to come to his office. He was changed, and so was his desk. He opened the desk drawers to show that there was no unfinished business inside of the desk. 6 weeks ago, this executive said, I had 3 different desks in 2 different offices and was snowed under by my work. I was never finished. After talking to you, I came back here and cleared out a wagon load of reports and old papers. Now I work at one desk, settle things as they come up, and don't have a mountain of unfinished business nagging me and making me tense and worried. But the most astonishing thing is I've recovered completely. There's nothing wrong any more with my health. Charles Evans Hughes, former Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, said, "Men do not die from overwork, they die from dissipation and worry." Yes, from dissipation of their energies, and worry because they never seem to get their work done. Good working habit number 2. Do things in the order of their importance. Henry L. Doherty, founder of the nationwide Cities Service Company, said that regardless of how much salary he paid, there were 2 abilities he found it almost impossible to find. Those 2 priceless abilities? First, the ability to think. Second, the ability to do things in the order of their importance. Charles Luckman, the lad who started from scratch and climbed in 12 years to president of the Pepsodent Company, got a salary of $100,000 a year and made $1 million besides. That lad declared that he owed much of his success to developing the 2 abilities that Henry L. Doherty said he found almost impossible to find. Charles Luckman said, "As far back as I can remember, I have gotten up at 5 o'clock in the morning because I can think better then than at any other time. I can think better then and plan my day, plan to do things in the order of their importance." Frank Betker, one of America's most successful insurance salesmen, didn't wait until 5 o'clock in the morning to plan his day. He planned it the night before. Set a goal for himself, a goal to sell a certain amount of insurance that day. If he failed, that amount was added to the next day, and so on. I know from long experience that one is not always able to do things in the order of their importance, but I also know that some kind of plan to do first things first is infinitely better than extemporizing as you go along. If George Bernard Shaw had not made it a rigid rule to do first things first, he would probably have failed as a writer and might have remained a bank cashier all his life. His plan called for writing 5 pages each day. That plan inspired him to go right on writing 5 pages a day for 9 heartbreaking years, even though he made a total of only $30 in those 9 years, about a penny a day. Even Robinson Crusoe wrote out a schedule of what he would do each hour of the day. Good working habit number 3. When you face a problem, solve it then and there if you have the facts necessary to make a decision. Don't keep putting off decisions. One of my former students, the late H.P. Howell, told me that when he was a member of the board of directors of U.S. Steel, the meetings of the board were often long, drawn-out affairs. Many problems were discussed. Few decisions were made. The result? Each member of the board had to carry home bundles of reports to study. Finally, Mr. Howell persuaded the board of directors to take up one problem at a time and come to a decision. No procrastination, no putting off. The decision might be to ask for additional facts. It might be to do something or do nothing, but a decision was reached on each problem before passing on to the next. Mr. Howell told me that the results were striking and salutary. The docket was cleared. The calendar was clean. No longer was it necessary for each member to carry home a bundle of reports. No longer was there a worried sense of unresolved problems. A good rule not only for the board of directors of U.S. Steel, but for you and me. Good working habit number 4. Learn to organize, deputize, and supervise. Many business persons are driving themselves to premature graves because they've never learned to delegate responsibility to others, insisting on doing everything themselves. Result: details and confusion overwhelm them. They're driven by a sense of hurry, worry, anxiety, and tension. It is hard to learn to delegate responsibilities. I know. It was hard for me, awfully hard. I also know from experience the disasters that can be caused by delegating authority to the wrong people. But difficult as it is to delegate authority, executives must do it if they are to avoid worry, tension, and fatigue. Executives who build up big businesses and don't learn to organize, deputize, and supervise usually pop off with heart trouble in their 50s or early 60s, heart trouble caused by tension and worries. Want a specific instance? Look at the death notices in your local paper. Chapter 27. How to banish the boredom that produces fatigue, worry, and resentment. One of the chief causes of fatigue is boredom. To illustrate, let's take the case of Alice, an executive who lives on your street. Alice came home one night utterly exhausted. She acted fatigued. She was fatigued. She had a headache. She had a backache. She was so exhausted she wanted to go to bed without waiting for dinner. Her mother pleaded. She sat down at the table. The telephone rang. The boyfriend. An invitation to a dance. Her eyes sparkled. Her spirit soared. She rushed upstairs, put on her Alice blue gown, and danced until 3 o'clock in the morning. When she finally did get home, she was not the slightest bit exhausted. She was, in fact, so exhilarated she couldn't fall asleep. Was Alice really and honestly tired 8 hours earlier when she looked and acted exhausted? Sure she was. She was exhausted because she was bored with her work, perhaps bored with life. There are millions of Alices. You may be one of them. It's a well-known fact that your emotional attitude usually has far more to do with producing fatigue than has physical exertion. A few years ago, Joseph E. Barmack, Ph.D., published in the Archives of Psychology a report of some of his experiments showing how boredom produces fatigue. Dr. Barmack put a group of students through a series of tests in which he knew they could have little interest. The result, the students felt tired and sleepy, complained of headaches and eye strain, felt irritable. In some cases, even their stomachs were upset. Was it all imagination? No. Metabolism tests were taken of these students. These tests showed that the blood pressure of the body and the consumption of oxygen actually decrease when a person is bored, and that the whole metabolism picks up immediately as soon as he begins to feel interest and pleasure in his work. We rarely get tired when we're doing something interesting and exciting. For example, I recently took a vacation in the Canadian Rockies, up around Lake Louise. I spent several days trout fishing along Coral Creek, fighting my way through brush higher than my head, stumbling over logs, struggling through fallen timber, yet after 8 hours of this I was not exhausted. Why? Because I was excited, exhilarated. I had a sense of high achievement. 6 cutthroat trout. But suppose I'd been bored by fishing, then how do you think I would have felt? I would have been worn out by such strenuous work at an altitude of 7,000 feet. Even in such exhausting activities as mountain climbing, boredom may tire you far more than the strenuous work involved. For example, Mr. S.H. Kingman, president of the Farmers and Mechanics Savings Bank of Minneapolis, told me of an incident that's a perfect illustration of that statement. In July 1953, the Canadian government asked the Canadian Alpine Club to furnish guides to train the members of the Prince of Wales Rangers in mountain climbing. Mr. Kingman was one of the guides chosen to train these soldiers. He told me how he and the other guides, men ranging from 42 to 59 years of age, took these young Army men on long hikes across glaciers and snowfields and up a sheer cliff of 40 feet where they had to climb with ropes and tiny footholds and precarious handholds. They climbed Michael's Peak, the Vice President Peak, and other unnamed peaks in the little Yoho Valley in the Canadian Rockies. After 15 hours of mountain climbing, these young men, who were in the pink of condition, they'd just finished a 6-week course in tough commando training, were utterly exhausted. Was their fatigue caused by using muscles that had not been hardened by commando training? Any man who's ever been through commando training would hoot at such a ridiculous question. No, they were utterly exhausted because they were bored by mountain climbing. They were so tired that many of them fell asleep without waiting to eat. But the guides, men who were 2 and 3 times as old as the soldiers, were they tired? Yes, but not exhausted. The guides ate dinner and stayed up for hours talking about the day's experiences. They were not exhausted because they were interested. When Dr. Edward Thorndike of Columbia was conducting experiments in fatigue, he kept young men awake for almost a week by keeping them constantly interested. After much investigation, Dr. Thorndike is reported to have said, "Boredom is the only real cause of diminution of work." If you're a mental worker, it's seldom the amount of work you do that makes you tired. You may be tired by the amount of work you do not do. For example, remember the day last week when you were constantly interrupted, no letters answered, appointments broken, trouble here and there. Everything went wrong that day. You accomplished nothing whatever, yet you went home exhausted and with a splitting head. The next day, everything clicked at the office. You accomplished 40 times more than you did the previous day, yet you went home fresh as a snowy white gardenia. You've had that experience, so have I. The lesson to be learned, just this. Our fatigue is often caused not by work, but by worry, frustration, and resentment. While writing this chapter, I went to see a revival of Jerome Kern's delightful musical comedy Showboat. Captain Andy, captain of the Cotton Blossom, says in one of his philosophical interludes, "The lucky folks are the ones that get to do things they enjoy doing." Such folks are lucky because they have more energy, more happiness, less worry, and less fatigue. Where your interests are, there is your energy also. Walking 10 blocks with a nagging wife or husband can be more fatiguing than walking 10 miles with an adoring sweetheart. And so what? What can you do about it? Well, here's what one stenographer did about it, a stenographer working for an oil company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For several days each month, she had one of the dullest jobs imaginable, filling out printed forms for oil leases, inserting figures and statistics. This task was so boring that she resolved in self-defense to make it interesting. How? Well, she had a daily contest with herself. She counted the number of forms she filled out each morning and then tried to excel that record in the afternoon. She counted each day's total and tried to do better the next day. Result? She was soon able to fill out more of these dull printed forms than any other stenographer in her division. And what did all this get her? Praise? No. Thanks? No. Promotion? No. Increased pay? No. But it did help to prevent the fatigue that is spawned by boredom. It did give her a mental stimulant. Because she'd done her best to make a dull job interesting, she had more energy, more zest, and got far more happiness out of her leisure hours. I happen to know this story is true because I married that girl. Here's the story of another stenographer who found it paid to act as if her work were interesting. She used to fight her work, but no more. She's Miss Valley G. Golden of Elmhurst, Illinois. Here's her story as she wrote it to me. There are 4 stenographers in my office, and each of us is assigned to take letters from several men. Once in a while, we get jammed up in these assignments. One day, when an assistant department head insisted that I do a long letter over, I started to rebel. I tried to point out to him that the letter could be corrected without being retyped, and he retorted that if I didn't do it over, he would find someone else who would. I was absolutely fuming. But as I started to retype this letter, it suddenly occurred to me that there were a lot of other people who would jump at the chance to do the work I was doing. Also, that I was being paid a salary to do just that work. I began to feel better. I suddenly made up my mind to do my work as if I actually enjoyed it, even though I despised it. Then I made this important discovery. If I do my work as if I really enjoy it, then I do enjoy it to some extent. I also found I can work faster when I enjoy my work, so there's seldom any need now for me to work overtime. This new attitude of mine gained me the reputation of being a good worker. And when one of the department superintendents needed a private secretary, he asked for me for the job because he said I was willing to do extra work without being sulky. This matter of the power of a changed mental attitude, wrote Miss Golden, has been a tremendously important discovery to me. It has worked wonders. Miss Golden used the wonder-working as-if philosophy of Professor Hans Weihinger. He taught us to act as if we were happy, and so on. If you act as if you are interested in your job, that bit of acting will tend to make your interest real. It will also tend to decrease your fatigue, your tensions, and your worries. A few years ago, Harlan A. Howard made a decision that completely altered his life. He resolved to make a dull job interesting, and he certainly had a dull one, washing plates, scrubbing counters, and dishing out ice cream in the high school lunchroom while the other boys were playing ball or kidding the girls. Harlan Howard despised his job, but since he had to stick to it, he resolved to study ice cream, how it was made, what ingredients were used, why some ice creams were better than others. He studied the chemistry of ice cream and became a whiz in the high school chemistry course. He was so interested now in food chemistry that he entered the Massachusetts State College and majored in the field of food technology. When the New York Cocoa Exchange offered a $100 prize for the best paper on uses of cocoa and chocolate, a prize open to all college students, who do you suppose won it? That's right, Harlan Howard. When he found it difficult to get a job, he opened a private laboratory in the basement of his home in Amherst, Massachusetts. Shortly after that, a new law was passed. The bacteria in milk had to be counted. Harlan A. Howard was soon counting bacteria for the 14 milk companies in Amherst, and he had to hire 2 assistants. Where will he be 25 years from now? Well, the men who are now running the business of food chemistry will be retired then, or dead, and their places will be taken by young lads who are now radiating initiative and enthusiasm. 25 years from now, Harlan A. Howard will probably be one of the leaders in his profession, while some of his classmates, to whom he used to sell ice cream over the counter, will be sour, unemployed, cussing the government, and complaining that they never had a chance. Harlan A. Howard might never have had a chance either if he hadn't resolved to make a dull job interesting. Years ago, there was another young man who was bored with his dull job of standing at a lathe, turning out bolts in a factory. His first name was Sam. Sam wanted to quit, but he was afraid he couldn't find another job. Since he had to do this dull work, Sam decided he would make it interesting, so he ran a race with the mechanic operating a machine beside him. One of them was to trim off the rough surfaces on his machine, the other was to trim the bolts down to the proper diameter. They would switch machines occasionally and see who could turn out the most bolts. The foreman, impressed with Sam's speed and accuracy, soon gave him a better job. That was the start of a whole series of promotions. 30 years later, Samuel Vauclane, was president of the Baldwin Locomotive Works. But he might have remained a mechanic all his life if he'd not resolved to make a dull job interesting. H.V. Kaltenborn, the famous radio news analyst, once told me how he made a dull job interesting. When he was 22 years old, he worked his way across the Atlantic on a cattle boat, feeding and watering the steers. After making a bicycle tour of England, he arrived in Paris, hungry and broke. Pawning his camera for $5, he put an ad in the Paris edition of the New York Herald and got a job selling stereopticon machines. I can remember those old-fashioned stereoscopes we used to hold up before our eyes and look at two pictures exactly alike. As we looked, a miracle happened. The two lenses in the stereoscope transformed the two pictures into a single scene with the effect of a third dimension. We saw distance, got an astonishing sense of perspective. Well, as I was saying, Kaltenborn started out selling these machines from door to door in Paris, and he couldn't speak French. But he earned $5,000 in commissions the first year and made himself one of the highest-paid salesmen in France that year. H.V. Kaltenborn told me that this experience did as much to develop within him the qualities that make for success as did any single year of study at Harvard. Confidence? He told me himself that after that experience he felt he could have sold the congressional record to French housewives. That experience gave him an intimate understanding of French life that later proved invaluable in interpreting on the radio European events. How did he manage to become an expert salesman when he couldn't speak French? Well, he had his employer write out his sales talk in perfect French, and he memorized it. He'd ring a doorbell, a housewife would answer, and Kaltenborn would begin repeating his memorized sales talk with an accent so terrible it was funny. He would show the housewife his pictures, and when she asked a question he would shrug his shoulders and say, "An American, an American." He'd take off his hat and point to a copy of the sales talk in perfect French that he'd pasted in the top of his hat. The housewife would laugh, and he would laugh, and show her more pictures. When H.V. Kaltenborn told me about this, he confessed that the job had been far from easy. He told me there was only one quality that pulled him through: his determination to make the job interesting. Every morning before he started out, he looked into the mirror and gave himself a pep talk. "Kaltenborn, you have to do this if you want to eat. Since you have to do it, why not have a good time doing it? Why not imagine every time you ring a doorbell that you're an actor before the footlights and that there's an audience out there looking at you? After all, what you're doing is just as funny as something on the stage, so why not put a lot of zest and enthusiasm into it?" Mr. Kaltenborn told me that these daily pep talks helped him transform a task that he had once hated and dreaded into an adventure that he liked and made highly profitable. When I asked Mr. Kaltenborn if he had any advice to give to the young men of America who are eager to succeed, he said, "Yes, go to bat with yourself every morning." We talk a lot about the importance of physical exercise to wake us up out of the half-sleep in which so many of us walk around, but we need even more some spiritual and mental exercises every morning to stir us into action. Give yourself a pep talk every day. Is giving yourself a pep talk every day silly, superficial, childish? No, on the contrary, it is the very essence of sound psychology. Our life is what our thoughts make it. These words are just as true today as they were 18 centuries ago when Marcus Aurelius first wrote them in his book on Meditations. Our life is what our thoughts make it. By talking to yourself every hour of the day, you can direct yourself to think thoughts of courage and happiness, thoughts of power and peace. By talking to yourself about the things you have to be grateful for, you can fill your mind with thoughts that soar and sing. By thinking the right thoughts, you can make any job less distasteful. Your boss wants you to be interested in your job so that he'll make more money. But let's forget about what the boss wants. Think only of what getting interested in your job will do for you. Remind yourself that it may double the amount of happiness you get out of life, for you spend about 1/2 of your waking hours at your work, and if you don't find happiness in your work, you may never find it anywhere. Keep reminding yourself that getting interested in your job will take your mind off your worries and, in the long run, will probably bring promotion and increased pay. Even if it doesn't do that, it will reduce fatigue to a minimum and help you enjoy your hours of leisure.